Hey folks, welcome back to Boss Economics World, your one-stop shop for calling out economic insanity, government mismanagement, and the sheer absurdity of it all. I'm your host, the guy who's been screaming into the void about reckless fiscal policy since day one, and today, oh boy, do we have a doozy for you. Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the latest economic dumpster fire, courtesy of the geniuses in Washington and their knack for turning prosperity into a slow-motion car crash. Let's talk about the U.S. consumer spending numbers for Q1 2025, and trust me, they're uglier than a tax bill on April 15th. Alright, folks, let's cut through the jargon and get to the meat of it. The U.S. economy is coughing up blood, and the latest data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, is the X-ray nobody wanted to see. Consumer spending in Q1 2025 grew at a pathetic 0.5% pace, down from an already anemic previously reported 1.2%. For context, that's the weakest growth since the dark days of the pandemic, when we were all locked in our homes binge-watching Netflix and panic-buying toilet paper. And if that wasn't bad enough, GDP actually shrank by 0.5% annualized, a downward revision from earlier estimates. That's right, folks, we're not just stalling, we're rolling backward down the hill. Now, if you're new here, you might be thinking, oh, it's just a bad quarter, no biggie. But hold on, because this isn't just a bad quarter, it's a flashing neon sign that the economy is on life support, and the government's cure is about as effective as a band-aid on a broken leg. Let's break this down, point by point, surface to core, and expose how this mess isn't just a random hiccup, it's the inevitable result of years of economic mismanagement, policy blunders, and a government that's more interested in pointing fingers than fixing problems. First stop on our tour of economic misery, consumer spending, the lifeblood of the U.S. economy. For those of you who slept through Econ 101, consumer spending accounts for roughly 70% of GDP. When consumers stop spending, the economy doesn't just slow down, it faceplants. And boy, did it faceplant in Q1 2025. The BEA data shows spending on services, think travel, dining out, concerts, you name it, contributed a measly 0.3 percentage points to GDP, the weakest since Q2 2020. Compare that to the previously reported 0.79 points, and you've got a downward revision so sharp it could cut through steel. Now, let's zoom in on the ugly details. All 7 major categories of services spending were revised lower. Recreation services, think theme parks, movie theaters, and gym memberships, led the charge, subtracting 0.14 percentage points from GDP, a far cry from the previously reported positive 0.04 point boost. Net foreign travel and transportation services also tanked, dragging GDP down further. Ryan Sweet, chief U.S. economist at Oxford Economics, nailed it when he said, recreational services and travel are among the components of spending that we flagged as being sensitive to shocks in consumer sentiment. Translation: people are scared, broke, or both, and they're not shelling out for Disneyland tickets or cross-country flights anymore. But here's the kicker, high-frequency data on U.S. travel is still deteriorating as we head into Q2 2025. That means the pain isn't over, it's just getting started. And guess what? The government wants you to believe this is all because of external shocks, like trade imbalances or Trump-era tariffs. Oh, please. That's like blaming a hangover on the bartender instead of the guy who downed 10 shots of tequila. Sure, tariffs play a role, but let's not kid ourselves, this is a homegrown disaster, courtesy of Washington's finest. Alright, let's peel back the onion and figure out why consumers are clutching their wallets like a lifeline. Spoiler alert, it's not because they suddenly decided minimalism is trendy. The real story is a toxic cocktail of inflation, interest rates, and wage stagnation, all stirred together by a government that's been asleep at the wheel. 1. Inflation is eating Americans alive. Remember when the Fed told us inflation was transitory back in 2021? Yeah, that aged like milk left out in the sun. Fast forward to 2025, and inflation is still biting hard. According to the latest Consumer Price Index, CPI, data, inflation in the U.S. was running at 4.8% year-over-year in May 2025, down from its peak of 9.1% in 2022 but still double the Fed's 2% target. And don't let that decline fool you, prices aren't going down, they're just rising more slowly. For the average American, that means the cost of groceries, rent, and gas is still outpacing their paycheck. Take a look at the numbers. The average price of a gallon of gas in June 2025 was $4.12, according to AAA, up from $3.50 a year ago. Food prices? Up 5.3% year-over-year, per the USDA. And rent? The median monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in a major U.S. city hit $1,950 in Q1 2025, a 7% jump from 2024, according to Zillow. Meanwhile, real wages, adjusted for inflation, have been flat or declining for the past 3 years, per Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Is it any wonder consumers are cutting back on luxuries, like a trip to the movies or a weekend getaway? 2. Interest rates are squeezing borrowers. Now, let's talk about the Federal Reserve, aka the folks who think raising interest rates is the answer to every problem. In their infinite wisdom, the Fed has kept the federal funds rate at a range of 5.25% to 5.5% through mid-2025, the highest level since 2001. Their goal? To cool inflation. The result? A chokehold on consumers and businesses alike. Credit card interest rates are averaging 21% per bank rate, and mortgage rates are hovering around 7.1%, according to Freddie Mac. That means the average American is paying hundreds more each month just to service their debt, leaving less for discretionary spending. Here's a real-world example: a $300,000, 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 7.1% costs $2,017 per month in principal and interest. At the 3% rate we saw in 2020, that same mortgage would have cost $1,265. That's an extra $752 per month, or $9,024 per year, sucked out of the consumer's budget. And don't even get me started on auto loans, where the average interest rate for a new car loan is now 8.9%, per Experian. No wonder people aren't splurging on services, they're too busy trying to keep their heads above water. 3. Consumer confidence is in the toilet. And then there's the vibe factor, aka consumer confidence. The Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index for June 2025 came in at 87.9, down from 95.4 a year ago and well below the 100 mark that signals optimism. Why the gloom? Well, aside from inflation and interest rates, Americans are increasingly worried about job security. The unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3% in May 2025, per BLS data, and job openings are at their lowest level since 2021. Add in the constant headlines about AI replacing jobs, geopolitical tensions, and political gridlock in Washington, and you've got a recipe for a consumer base that's too scared to spend. Alright, folks, we've peeled back the layers, and now we're at the rotten core of this economic mess: government mismanagement. Let's be real, these consumer spending numbers aren't just a market correction or a natural cycle. They're the direct result of years of short-sighted policies, reckless spending, and a refusal to address structural problems in the economy. First up, let's talk about the government spending addiction. Since the pandemic, Washington has been on a spending spree that would make a Vegas high roller blush. The national debt hit $35 trillion in 2025, up from $27 trillion in 2020, according to the Treasury Department. That's a 30% increase in just 5 years. And what do we have to show for it? Crumbling infrastructure, a healthcare system that's still a mess, and an economy that's teetering on the edge of recession. Take the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, for example. Billed as a game changer for climate and healthcare, it's mostly just added fuel to the inflationary fire by pumping billions into the economy at a time when supply chains were already strained. And don't forget the endless rounds of stimulus checks and bailouts, which, while necessary in 2020, kept going long after the economy reopened, flooding the system with cash and driving up prices. It's Economics 101, too much money chasing too few goods equals inflation. But hey, who needs economic literacy when you've got votes to buy? And then there's the Fed, which has been obsessed with raising interest rates to fight inflation, even as it chokes off growth. Look, I get it, inflation is bad, and the Fed has to do something. But the problem is, they waited too long to act. Back in 2021, when inflation was already heating up, Fed Chair Jerome Powell was busy telling us it was transitory. By the time they started